15 worst Japanese sleeper cars of the 1970s. In the 1970s, Japan built cars that looked like grocery getters, but some secretly had bite. A few tried to play the sleeper game and failed hilariously. One even promised speed and struggled to pass a lawnmower. Let's dive in. 15. 1978 Toyota Cressida MX-32. It's easy to write off this next one as a retirement cruiser. Soft seats, conservative lines, and a ride so smooth it could lull you to sleep. But underneath the chrome trim and beige personality, something unexpected was lurking. The late 70s saw Japan entering a new era of refinement, and this car was at the forefront. Marketed as a premium option for families looking to upgrade from their Corollas, it came equipped with a 2.6-liter inline-six engine, borrowed from Toyota's Crown. That straight six on paper wasn't a joke. It made around 110 horsepower and 140 pound-feet of torque, paired to either a 3-speed automatic or a 5-speed manual. Rear-wheel drive, independent rear suspension. On paper, it had the makings of a baby luxury sports sedan. But that's where the story takes a turn. Despite the solid engine, the Cressida's weight, hovering just under 3,000 pounds, held it back. Its 0 to 60 miles per hour time hovered around 12 seconds, making it slower than a tired Pinto. It had poise, sure, but punch? Barely. It was tuned for comfort, not thrills. The automatic choked whatever urgency the engine had left, and the suspension, though advanced, was too soft to support any spirited driving. From a distance, it might have looked like the kind of car that hides something under the hood. It didn't. It whispered performance, but never raised its voice. Coming up next is a car that looked like a government sedan and performed like one too. 14. 1971 Nissan Cedric 2000 GL 130 series. If the last one whispered performance, this one barely even spoke. From a glance, it carried itself like a diplomat's daily, long, boxy, and buttoned up, the kind of car you'd see parked outside a bank manager's office in 1971. But under its polished exterior, it pretended to carry something more. The Cedric 2000 GL was Nissan's attempt to blend prestige with accessibility. Aimed at the growing middle class craving European flair, without European price tags, it offered modest luxury touches. Chrome details, a plush cabin, and the kind of silence you'd expect from a funeral procession. But under the hood sat the L20 inline-six, an engine with just about 109 horsepower and 115 pound-feet of torque. Not awful, but not exciting either. Here's where expectations crumbled. With its 1,300 plus kilograms curb weight and that mild engine, it clocked a 0 to 60 miles per hour time of around 13 seconds. That's family wagon territory. Even slower when paired with its 3-speed column shift automatic. It felt heavy, sluggish in the mid-range, and never quite committed to anything beyond smooth idling. Nissan could have dropped in the L24 or added twin carbs like on the sportier Skylines. They didn't. What you got instead was a car that looked diplomatic and moved like paperwork, slow, procedural, and stuck in traffic. Up next, a car that should have been a backroad surprise, but instead felt like it was dragging luggage uphill. 13. 1977 Isuzu Florian GT. You'd think a car with GT in its name would come with some bite. Maybe a tighter suspension, a punchier motor, at the very least, some urgency in the throttle. But the next entry on this list faked the badge and forgot the follow-through. The 1977 Isuzu Florian GT was marketed with subtle flair. A squared-off formal sedan that didn't scream for attention, but wore just enough trim, stripes, and wheels to make you pause. It was Isuzu's attempt to inject sport into an otherwise sensible mid-size car. And under the hood, a 1.8-liter G180W twin-cam four-cylinder. Sounds promising, right? Twin cams in the 70s usually meant business, but Isuzu's GT tuned more for noise than motion. The G180W made around 115 horsepower and 110 pound-feet of torque. Paired to a body weighing roughly 2,500 pounds, it moved with the energy of a jogger on a hot day. 0 to 60 miles per hour took over 12 seconds, and the gearing didn't help. Sure, it revved clean, but without the torque to back it, the Florian often felt like it was trying too hard and going nowhere fast. The styling had the bones of something that might surprise you. Sporty badging, optional spoilers, even a 5-speed manual in some versions. But in practice, it was all flash and no fire. A touring sedan trapped in a track day costume. Coming up, a car with a sporty name, rotary DNA in its family tree, and zero urgency when it counts. 12. 1973 Mazda 616 Deluxe. The early 70s were kind of Mazda's image. With rotary engines shaking up the scene, it seemed like anything coming out of Hiroshima had the potential to punch above its weight, but not this one. The 1973 Mazda 616 Deluxe looked like it shared DNA with the RX-2, and technically it did. Same body, same rear-wheel drive layout, even some shared trim. But under the hood, no rotary, no twin carbs, no excitement. Instead, it housed a 1.6-liter inline-4 that squeezed out a humble 75 horsepower and 88 pound-feet of torque. That meant a 0 to 60 time creeping past 14 seconds, and not much got better after that. Even its name, Deluxe, felt ironic. Sure, you got soft seats and a decent stereo, but performance? Nearly absent. It wasn't built for thrills, and worse, it borrowed the silhouette of a car that was. So when people saw one, they expected a little chaos. What they got was commuter car calmness, wrapped in a sports sedan skin. It was a bait and switch that Mazda rarely repeated. The 616 was the kind of car that set up a punchline and forgot to deliver it. But the next car, it wanted to be bold. Styling from a sci-fi sketchpad, a name that promised luxury and performance. And yet, it struggled to outpace a loaded pickup. 11. 1975 Toyota Mark II GSS X20. Now here's something that should have been special. A factory badge that read GSS, Grand Super Sport. Sounds bold, right? The kind of name that makes you think of high-revving engines and backroad precision. But what Toyota gave us instead was polite mediocrity. The 1975 Toyota Mark II GSS wore its aspirations proudly. Subtle stripes, unique badging, a slightly firmer suspension, it looked like the grown-up sibling to a Celica. Under the hood, it ran a 2.0-liter 18R GDOHC inline-4, pushing out about 130 horsepower and 123 pound-feet of torque. Not bad for the time on paper, but things quickly fell apart when you actually drove it. The weight of the Mark II, tipping over 2,800 pounds, made acceleration sluggish. 0 to 60 took nearly 11 seconds, and while the engine loved to rev, the gearing and the weight held it back. The suspension tuning was a step up from the base model, sure, but it never felt planted or sharp. It was trying to be a sports sedan in a body that wanted nothing more than to cruise quietly to the office. What you had was a car that made promises in bold font and delivered in lowercase. A lukewarm blend of sport and comfort that left enthusiasts wanting more and commuters wondering what all the fuss was about. Next up, a car with a futuristic name, dramatic fastback lines, and rally car potential buried so deep. Most owners never found it. And if you're enjoying these forgotten flops, hit that subscribe button. There's plenty more underrated and overhyped metal still to come. 10. 1979 Mitsubishi Galant Lambda GSR 2000. At first glance, this one had it. A long, sleek fastback shape, hidden headlights, a badge that screamed GSR 2000. It was Mitsubishi's attempt to blend 70s Japanese tech with 80s American flair. And if looks were everything, it might have worked. The 1979 Mitsubishi Galant Lambda GSR 2000 carried the kind of design that made people stop and stare. Under the hood sat the 2.0-liter Astron engine, good for around 110 horsepower and 120 pound-feet of torque. It even had Mitsubishi's signature silent shaft technology to smooth out vibrations, and in theory it was engineered for confident grand touring. But then you put your foot down, and not much happened. The Lambda weighed in at nearly 3,000 pounds, and all that style came at a cost. 0 to 60 miles per hour? Over 13 seconds. The handling was just as soft, more suited to gentle highway drifting than aggressive cornering. Even with a manual transmission, the GSR didn't feel sporty. It felt like a cruiser wearing a tracksuit. It was all theater, no climax. For every promise the styling made, the drivetrain quietly stepped back and shrugged. So here's the real question. Do you think car makers should stop slapping sporty badges on sedans that clearly don't deliver? Drop a comment and let me know. Next, a car with rally dreams and coupe lines, yet somehow got outperformed by budget compacts half its size. 9. 1971 Subaru Leone Coupe 1400 RX. Coupe styling, rally aspirations, and a badge that read RX. This one had all the makings of a secret weapon. But for the 1971 Subaru Leone Coupe 1400 RX, ambition outpaced ability from the moment it left the factory. At a glance, the Leone RX looked like something you'd see sliding through a gravel stage. Short overhangs, tight proportions, and that sporty fastback silhouette gave it an edge. Subaru even offered it with a 1.4-liter flat four, a boxer engine layout that hinted at the brand's future rally legacy. On paper, the power wasn't awful, about 80 horsepower and just under 80 pound-feet of torque. The car was relatively light too, tipping the scales around 1,900 pounds. So where did it go wrong? The gearing was short, the revs came quick, but the torque curve was flatter than a parking lot. 0 to 60 took over 14 seconds, and even then, the engine sounded more desperate than determined. Handling was sharpish, but grip was limited by skinny tires and soft suspension. Subaru wanted the RX to be a driver's car, but what they ended up with was a solid economy coupe dressed in rally cosplay. The Leone RX was the kind of car you wanted to believe in, until it tried to pass a lawn service van and couldn't. Some cars fake it with styling, but the one coming up next didn't even bother hiding its struggle. It just slapped on a badge and hoped no one noticed the wheeze under the hood. 1976 Datsun 710 SSS Violet. This one came with a badge that carried serious weight, SSS. For Datsun fans, that usually meant a tighter chassis, a twin-carb engine, and enough performance to raise eyebrows. But the 1976 Datsun 710 SSS, that badge may as well have stood for sorta slow sedan. The 710, also known as the Violet, had potential baked into its DNA. It followed the legendary 510 and aimed to blend economy with a touch of sport. Under the hood, it packed a 1.8-liter L18 inline-4 with dual SU carbs, making about 100 horsepower and 105 pound-feet of torque. It came with independent rear suspension, a rarity in its class, and a manual gearbox. Everything on paper pointed toward a proper, under-the-radar performance car. But real-world numbers told a different story. 0 to 60 miles per hour took nearly 13 seconds, and the engine felt lazy outside its narrow power band. Even with the upgraded suspension, the car was let down by vague steering and a ride that leaned more toward float than firm. Worse yet, the 710 had lost the crispness and responsiveness that made the 510 such a cult hero. It was heavier, softer, and slower, yet wore its SSS badge with the confidence of a car that actually deserved it. Sometimes a name sets the bar too high, and when you miss that bar by this much, it's hard not to feel the disappointment. There's bold, and then there's ridiculous. Wait until you see the car that thought rotary looks could distract you from zero urgency. 1976 Mazda 808 Coupe. Same body, same silhouette, same aggressive little nose. If you saw one in traffic, you'd swear it was a rotary-powered RX-3 ready to tear up the tarmac. But get closer, and the truth hits harder than a stalled launch. It's not an RX anything. It's the 1976 Mazda 808 Coupe, and it's all show, no go. The 808 shared its body with the RX-3, and Mazda didn't do much to visually separate the two. That meant flared arches, coupe lines, and a stance that promised mischief. But pop the hood, and instead of the high-revving Wankel you hoped for, you'd find a 1.3-liter piston engine making a modest 75 horsepower and 90 pound-feet of torque. No fancy rotors, no buzzy redline, just a basic four-cylinder mated to a car that looked way faster than it would ever be. Performance was forgettable at best. 0 to 60 in about 15 seconds depending on the transmission. The car handled decently thanks to its lightweight build, but without the power to back it up, corners were more about survival than speed. To the untrained eye, it looked like trouble. To anyone behind the wheel, it felt like a prank. And yet people still bought it, thinking they were getting RX thrills at a bargain. Instead, they got left behind at green lights by station wagons. Some cars look fast, standing still. This one looked fast, sounded tired, and got humbled by compacts half its size. But the next one? It sounded like a rally champ and wore its AWD badge with pride, until it hit a hill and begged for mercy. 1971 Subaru FF1 Star was a car that seemed ahead of its time. Front-wheel drive, boxer engine, lightweight chassis. Subaru marketed it like a quirky underdog, built for the enthusiast who didn't want to follow the crowd. But the 1971 FF1 Star ended up being more novelty than knockout. This was Subaru's early attempt to break into the US market with something different, and different it was. The FF1 used a 1.1-liter flat-4 engine, producing just 62 horsepower and 67 pound-feet of torque. That's not just slow, it's almost criminal, even for the early 70s. And while the car weighed under 1,700 pounds, that power-to-weight ratio was still a recipe for frustration. 0 to 60, over 16 seconds, and it wasn't much quicker downhill with a tailwind. What made things worse was how earnest the FF1 looked. It wasn't trying to be cool, it just was different. A clean, almost European-inspired fastback coupe design gave it a quiet confidence, and the flat four gave it a unique rumble that made you think it might have potential. The handling was decent, the brakes were fine, but the powertrain, all bark, no bite. The FF1 Star wasn't just underpowered, it was underwhelming. It wanted to play in the growing world of compact performance, but showed up without a plan or a pulse. Still, at least it looked humble, because what's coming next pretended to be a luxury cruiser with secret speed, and ended up stalling somewhere between a diesel clatter and a broken promise. 5. 1975 Isuzu Bellett 1800 Diesel. Diesel and performance rarely go hand in hand, especially not in the 1970s. But the 1975 Isuzu Bellett 1800 Diesel somehow managed to make things worse by pretending to wear both hats. On the outside, it looked like a tidy compact sedan with just enough edge to pass as a junior sports saloon. Under the hood, a soundtrack that sounded like construction equipment and moved like it was dragging a trailer. The Bellett had already earned some respect earlier in the decade with its sporty GT trims and solid rally credentials. So when the diesel version arrived, many assumed it carried some of that DNA forward. It didn't. This one housed a 1.8-liter diesel engine that put out a wheezy 50 horsepower and 75 pound-feet of torque. No, that's not a typo. It was agonizingly slow, 0 to 60 times pushing 20 seconds, depending on how patient you were. And even when you got it moving, the engine was loud, clattery, and painfully unresponsive. Isuzu tried to market it as a frugal, long-distance option, but the performance gap between this and the gasoline variants wasn't just noticeable, it was embarrassing. Handling was average, the ride was harsh, and overtaking was a prayer. This was a car that wore a family name built on motorsport, but moved like it was late for retirement. And just when you think it can't get more confused, a car rolls in with race-style carbs, twin-cam dreams, and an engine note that wanted to scream, but came out more like a sigh. 4. 1971 Honda 1300 Coupe 9S. Few cars from the early 70s looked as sharp or sounded as wild as this one. Sleek fastback styling, quad headlights, vents galore, and an engine layout that screamed, "Race me." The 1971 Honda 1300 Coupe 9S didn't just look different, it was different. But sometimes being different isn't enough. This car was Honda's bold, borderline obsessive leap into the performance world. It packed a 1.3-liter air-cooled inline-4 with 4 carburetors and a DOHC setup, tech normally reserved for serious sports machines. It produced a surprising around 110 horsepower, revved over 7,000 RPM, and had one of the most aggressive engine notes of any Japanese car in its class. But all that drama, pure overkill for a front-wheel drive coupe that struggled to make sense of its own power. 0 to 60 miles per hour came in at just under 11 seconds, which wasn't terrible. But the delivery was twitchy, the handling unpredictable, and the cooling system unreliable at best. Add in the fact that the engine was air-cooled in a time when liquid cooling was quickly becoming standard, and you got a car that often ran hotter than its own hype. The 1300 Coupe 9S was an engineering experiment with a cool badge and a killer soundtrack, but little substance behind the noise. It looked fast. It sounded like a banshee, but it drove like a science project Honda abandoned midway through. There's only 3 cars left on the list, and they just get weirder, louder, and slower. If you're into forgotten misfires and mechanical head-scratchers, hit that subscribe button. You don't want to miss what's next. 3. 1977 Honda Accord 3-door hatchback. By the time 1977 rolled around, Honda was hitting its stride. The Civic had found its niche, and the newly introduced Accord promised a bit more space, style, and presence. The 3-door hatchback version, in particular, looked like a potential sleeper. Sporty stance, sharp nose, and a fastback silhouette that hinted at more than just economy. But the reality? All style, zero sting. The first-gen Accord came with a 1.6-liter CVCC inline-4, good for around 80 horsepower and 89 pound-feet of torque. It was mated to a lightweight body, just under 2,000 pounds, and had a 5-speed manual transmission, which was rare for a compact at the time. On paper, that sounds like a fun little city rocket. But it wasn't, not even close. The gearing was short, the engine was buzzy, and 0 to 60 took nearly 13 seconds. It struggled to accelerate past traffic, and any hope of spirited driving was crushed by the soft suspension and vague steering feel. Despite its sharp looks, the Accord hatch was built for comfort, emissions compliance, and fuel economy, not performance. Yet so many mistook it for a hot hatch before hot hatches were even a thing. So what do you think? Should a car's design be honest about its performance? Or is it okay to bluff a little with a sporty shape? Drop a comment and let me know. 2 cars left, and the next one? It might just be the loudest, slowest, most overconfident microcar ever built. 2. 1974 Daihatsu Fellow Max SS. You don't expect much from a kei car, but when it comes with an SS badge, racing stripes, and a name like Fellow Max, you can't help but raise an eyebrow. The 1974 Daihatsu Fellow Max SS promised spunk in a fun-sized package. Instead, it served up something closer to mechanical comedy. This was Daihatsu's attempt at injecting sportiness into Japan's smallest road category. It came equipped with a 356 cubic centimeter 2-cylinder, 2-stroke engine, making a wild-sounding 40 horsepower. That may not sound impressive, but when the whole car weighed under 1,200 pounds, the power-to-weight ratio wasn't laughable. It should have been snappy. The styling certainly tried to convince you: flared wheel arches, sporty decals, and just enough aggression to make it look like a cartoon GTI. But in real-world driving, it was noisy, frantic, and painfully underwhelming. 0 to 60, forget it. It barely made it to 60 at all. And with the 2-stroke setup, the engine required constant high revs just to keep up with city traffic. Never mind actually passing anyone. The ride was harsh, the handling twitchy, and the noise was relentless. It sounded like a chainsaw dragging a shopping cart. The Fellow Max SS is what happens when a car tries to scream, "Race me," while wheezing up a residential hill. It was charming, yes, but as a sleeper, it had all the bark and not even a nibble. And then there was one, a sedan that actually looked like a total snooze fest until you saw the badge. A badge that lied. 1. 1977 Toyota Corona GT 2000 RT104. It wore a name that sounded official. GT 2000, a badge with real weight, especially in the 70s when GT still meant something. The 1977 Toyota Corona GT 2000 looked like the quiet car your uncle might take to the office, maybe sneak to a weekend barbecue. But behind that dull beige exterior and 4-door practicality was a bold claim. This was supposed to be the sportiest Corona yet. And yes, it had some ingredients. Toyota fitted it with the 2.0-liter 18RG twin-cam inline-4, pumping out about 130 horsepower and 125 pound-feet of torque. That's not bad on paper. It had a 5-speed manual, rear-wheel drive, and even a tighter suspension setup. Sounds promising, right? Until you actually drove it. The Corona GT 2000 weighed over 2,800 pounds, and that extra mass smothered any signs of athleticism. 0 to 60 times hovered around 11.5 seconds, and the rev-happy engine was constantly fighting an uphill battle against the car's own weight. It didn't help that the steering felt vague, and the chassis, despite being sport-tuned, still floated through corners like a senior citizen on roller skates. Even the gear ratios felt mismatched. You'd shift into third hoping to catch some momentum, and instead get a long, hollow groan from under the hood. It looked sensible, mature, forgettable, and it drove exactly like that. The GT badge might have worked on the Celica. On the Corona, it felt like a practical joke. Which of these had you fooled the most? Was it the Corolla clone that whispered GT, or the K car that barked louder than it bit? Drop your pick in the comments. I'm watching for the bold answers. Hit subscribe, keep your seatbelt on, and get ready, because the real underground legends are still hiding in plain sight.